architectural side. You'll get to talk to him, probably 80% of the time, and he can answer your questions directly right then and there. Also, if you're not familiar, we also are a Leica reseller, so we provide Leica laser scannings. It's really popular now in the BIM world to capture as-built data. So literally you set this up in the inside of a room or outside. It goes around 360 degrees. It shoots up to 1,000 points a second, up to 900 feet. Anything it can see pulls into your computer with XYZ coordinates, and you can measure information seamlessly in there. You can bring this right into Revit, and you can design the as-built data right inside here, comparing it to the scanned data in your Revit model. We can also take that to Navisworks or your AutoCAD Architecture or AutoCAD MEP as well. So a couple of ideas there, and just want to introduce Sterling Systems. And let's go ahead and move along to the presentation. And just want to introduce Brandon, again, our senior BIM specialist and lead Revit guru here is going to walk you through the rest of the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chad. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. I don't know if, Chad, you can confirm real quick that my audio is working properly.
Sounds real good, Brandon. Thanks a lot.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and mute Chad here real quick so we can see that. I wanted to just backtrack for 1 second real quick. I noticed there was a small glitch in the PowerPoint there. Dave Press is actually the picture you're seeing there. He's the Vice President of our sales department. My apologies for that. Thank you, Chad, for helping us out to get us started. Again, my name is Brandon LaCourcier. I work here with Sterling Systems. Today we're going to be talking about the introduction of Revit family creation. So this is part 2 in our 4-part mini-series on Revit architecture. For some of you that were in our previous course, these next couple of slides may seem a little familiar, but for those of you guys that were not in our introduction to Revit architecture course, hopefully this is new information for you. A couple of things that we're going to talk about today. First are the course objectives for today's class. What we're going to be talking about to start things off is industry and Revit terminology simplified. We're also going to talk or take a little introduction to the user interface as it pertains to family creation. So we're going to look at the family interface as opposed to our typical project interface. We're going to do some massing, which is a critical element involved with family creation. We're then going to talk about parametric modeling as well as parametric constraints. So we're going to go into those different aspects of modeling. We're going to talk briefly about formulas as well as how we can access the type properties menu and make those sorts of changes. And we'll wrap up with a brief discussion on shared parameters. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about, and I'm going to be somewhat brief with these topics, is really just what Revit is. For those of you guys that are unaware, Revit is a building information modeling software, also known as BIM. I'm sure many of you guys have heard that acronym, throw it around like green last year. So definitely a popular term, a hot button phrase to say the least. BIM is really made up of 2 parts. It's made up of what we call bidirectional associativity as well as parametric relationships. Now, BIM is sort of a larger topic. When we talk about what BIM is, it's really 3 components. It's the building, which is obviously the vision that you develop for your clients, oftentimes represented in a 3D element, but sometimes maybe just in 2D documentation. Along with that building information, we tag along data like drawings, schedules, specifications. And what's interesting about Revit is that it seamlessly links that information to the building data that you've developed. And finally, we have this model information. This is really one of the reasons that clients are demanding the use of BIM software. Modeling is really the exportation of that data that allows things like facility management to occur, energy analysis. We could even do things like life safety diagrams. A lot of different information that comes from that model ability that we find in the Revit software. Now, how is it developed? Well, Revit is what we call a parametric change engine, and that parametric change engine has things such as views, annotations, components, all sorts of elements that sort of tie into it. We're going to talk about a lot of those elements because in family creation, we really set the building blocks for how those components will interact with the parametric change engine that is Revit. There's 2 parts to Revit, and the first of which is bidirectional associativity, and what that does is it ensures that changes that are reflected in one view correspond throughout a project. This is going to be relative to the parameters we're going to be building in our families later on today. We also have the ability to coordinate those changes and maintain consistency throughout a project. So if we make an adaptation to a family, as we're going to do later on today, we can rest assured that all of those changes occurred throughout the project, not just in that particular instance. We also have something called parametric relationships, and we'll talk about this briefly as well. Really, it's the foundation of how Revit operates, and it's this idea that one entity could be reliant on another. So we'll talk about that as we move into family creation. Now, many business issues are resolved in using the Revit program, everything from design change corrections to collaborative design internally within an office. We're able to standardize company standards very easily in the program so that we're getting a consistent workflow and a consistent end product for our clients. We're also able to integrate the design and drafting phases, and we can connect annotation designs to actual modeled objects, so there's not a disconnect between those elements. Finally, it helps meet the demands of the new deliverable requirements that a lot of state organizations are requesting. Not to mention, it helps architecture firms be more profitable in being able to produce more documentation in the same time that they're accustomed to producing their existing level of detail. Now, Sterling Systems, as Chad talked about, is an excellent resource for you in your office. We have a couple of opportunities that we've been presenting to our new clientele. We're providing 1 year of our gold support with each seat of software that's purchased through Sterling Systems. What that means is you're able to reach a certified Autodesk professional such as myself by phone or email. We also provide virtual on-site support through this gold support program, where we're actually able to VPN into your machine and either demonstrate a process or correct an issue that might be plaguing a project that you're working on. One thing we also want to bring up is on February 16th, we'll be bringing Lynn Allen in, who is a great Autodesk representative. She knows everything when it comes to Autodesk, whether it's AutoCAD, BIM news, what the highlights of the new product releases are going to be. She's fantastic and very well informed, and it's rare that she travels to this neck of the woods. So we're very happy to have her, and we hope that you guys will join us for that February 16th presentation. We'll go through this a little bit longer. Again, Dave Press, the Vice President of Sales, was unable to attend the event today, but fortunately Chad was able to step in and help with us. If you have any questions regarding your accounts, don't hesitate to contact Dave. Right there you'll see his email address, davepress@sterlingsystemu.sa.com. You can also go to our website for additional information regarding Dave and our other programs that are available through Sterling Systems. You can reach us by phone at 1-480-629-8131. Again, my name is Brandon LaCourciere, and my email is a mouthful, so hopefully you've got your pens handy there. Sorry about the long last name, but they decided to do a two-part name in our email system, so mine's extra long. But please feel free to email me with any questions also. I also want to let everyone know about January 16th. We have part 3 of this presentation, and what we'll be discussing in that one is editing family creation. So we're going to actually edit families we pull from sites like Revit City or Autodesk Seek. We're just going to talk a little bit more about the parametrics and how we can do things like set up formulas, make adjustments to those families, or maybe just enhance them to be a bit more parametric. Also, Wednesday, January 25th, we'll be talking about part 4 of this series, which are the top 10 tips and tricks. We'll be covering things such as phasing, design options, also some other great features that are in the software that maybe you're not very familiar with or something that you're interested in seeing. I know one of the big issues that we're going to talk about there is work sets. So something that I think people are very interested in but not always so familiar with. So we'll definitely be covering those topics. Now, without any further delay, we're going to go ahead and start into family creation. I am going to go ahead and just ask that if anybody does have any questions or having difficulty with sound, they go ahead and post on the question board real quick. That way I can see. It doesn't look like anybody else has had an issue here, so I'm going to go ahead and step into the next phase of the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and start by looking at the Revit architecture home screen. So this is our startup screen. It's a new addition to the Revit interface as of 2009. Actually, you're going to start to see this a part of a lot of the different Autodesk platforms that are available, not just Revit in the coming years. Really great tool to start up your projects. There are 3 sections to this. The first is the top section where you can start a new project. You can also open an existing project, either by going to the Open tool or accessing one of the recent file windows. Just below that, we have Families, which we're actually going to work from today. And inside this Family section, you can also access recent families that you've developed. Finally, at the bottom, we have the Resource Center. This is where you can access information like what's new, picks and clicks, help topics, as well as community chat boards where we talk about very important issues or problems that people might be experiencing. A great resource for new users or people that are just trying to master the interface and might have difficult questions. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start with family creation. I'm going to be working out of Autodesk Revit Architecture 2012. Understand that you could also work from the Revit MEP or Revit Structure interface and have very similar options as we're going to find in the Revit Architecture interface. So if you are more familiar with the MEP program, you won't be out of place in sitting through this presentation. As I said, we can open up families from a couple locations. We can do it right here from our Recent Files window. We could select that we want to open an existing family, start a new family, start a new conceptual mass, or we could access Autodesk Seek to find existing content that we might want to open and edit. We also could go up to the Revit symbol in the upper left-hand corner. We could say that we want to create a new family. And once we do that, we're going to get what's called a new family selection template file. We're going to have a bunch of template files that we can pull from. Now, each one of these template files is specific to a type of content. And what's important to remember is these template files are specific to the content's location in our visibility graphics settings. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to navigate to generic model. One of the things I want to point out to you as we look at generic model as an example is that we have different methods for family creation. So as an example, one of the options that we have is creating a generic model that's adaptive, which is more of a conceptual feature. We also could create a generic model that is ceiling-based, so it's looking for ceilings to be placed. We have the ability to go ahead and do a face-based generic model. We could do a floor-based family, a line-based family. We could do a pattern-based family, a roof, a wall, or we could just do a standalone. Now, not every piece of content is going to have all of these options, but generic possesses the majority of them. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start with just a generic model. And we're going to go ahead and say open. Now, when we open up our generic model, we're going to notice that it looks very similar to when we start a new project. We've got some information that's showed up here on our view window. We've got the ribbon up here across the top, our properties palette, and our project browser. So all things that we're familiar with. However, there are some adaptations when we're in the family creation mode. One of it, which is the ribbon itself. First of all, the Home tab still possesses most of our modeling information, but you'll notice that most of the modeling information is mass-based. So creating things like extrusions, blends, revolves, sweeps, swept blends, or void forms. We also have things like model lines, placing components, model text, a lot of different features that we would find typically in generic modeling features. Also, we have an Insert tab, and on the Insert tab, we could import other Revit information. We could link CAD data. We could import an image or load a family if we wanted to. Our Annotation tab is going to have all of our dimensioning, symbolic lines, masking regions, those sorts of items. Our View tab is going to be where we can create things such as sections, default 3D views. We could develop a camera view if we wanted to. Our Manage tab allows us to edit things such as shared parameters, transfer project standards, or purge unused data from our project. And finally, our Modify tab is where we can make modifications to content that we find inside of our project view. Our Properties palette is largely the same. and our project browser is largely the same also. Now we're not going to get too specific into how the interface navigates. Hopefully we've got some familiarity at this point with that. But what I am going to talk about is sort of how it works in the sense of developing a family. A couple of things to realize right out of the gate are our reference planes. Now, right out of the gate, you're going to notice that the software is presenting 2 reference planes to us. Also, you'll notice that these reference planes are named. So you'll notice it says center, front, and back. You'll notice that it also says center, left, and right. When we select these reference planes that we see on screen, you'll notice over here in our properties palette that we have an opportunity to name those items. So I can actually name a reference plane. Really a great feature when we have multiple reference planes that exist within one view. You'll also notice that these reference planes are pinned. Now they don't have to be pinned. We could go ahead and unpin them and do different things with them, or we could pin one and leave another unpinned. For now what we're going to do is we're going to leave these objects pinned because it's important that we have a solid constraint to work from. Before we get into developing constraints and really getting into developing an actual family, let's talk about massing and all the different massing options we have. The first massing option we have is creating an extrusion. This is a very simple process. If I select the extrusion tool, you'll notice that I get a contextual tab called Modify Create Extrusion. Now what I can do from this tab is I can go ahead and generate a shape. I'm going to just go ahead and generate a simple shape. An important thing to remember when we're generating these shapes is they must be a closed loop. That's not to say that they can't have multiple loops though. As an example, if I were to create a shape similar to this and then select my Finish button, you would notice that in a 3D view, it's generated a shape with a hole in it. That isn't the only way for us to make a hole in a shape, but for now we just wanted to see some of the flexibility we had in generating a shape. I'm going to go ahead and select the new shape that we just placed, and I'm just going to drag it over to the side so we can build some more shapes. I'm going to again go to my Home tab, and I am going to select the Blend tool. Now the Blend tool is a bit more complicated than the Extrusion tool. In the Blend tool, we basically set a base for our shape, and we set a top for our shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating my base shape. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a simple square. Now I know that I'm working on my base shape because if I look at my contextual tab, the only option I have is to edit top. So if I were to go ahead and hit edit top, you'll notice that this now says edit base, and the information that I drew has now gone to a grayscale, which means the base information is already in place, but it is currently not editable. I'm going to go ahead and develop a second shape. In this case, I'll do a circle. And you'll notice that I do have the ability to switch back to the base shape if I wanted to and make additional modifications. Once I'm happy with my top and my bottom, I can go ahead and hit Finish. And again, if I switch to 3D, I notice that I've developed a shape where the two pieces have kind of turned into each other. You'll notice that I do have grip controls, so I can go ahead and make adjustments with those grip controls. You'll also notice in selecting the object that in our Properties palette, we have the ability to make changes, so I could go ahead and enter in, as an example, 6 feet, so it would modify it. I'm going to switch back to my reference level, and I'm going to again move this shape just off to the side. I'll zoom in again to my reference planes that I have on screen here. I'm going to go to my Home tab, and I'm going to create a revolve. Now before I do this, it's important that we understand what our work planes are in generating these revolves. Now as an example, I'm in a floor plan view right now. So if I select my revolve tool and I go ahead and I draw a shape, I'm just going to go ahead and draw just sort of an interesting shape here. Nothing overly complicated, just something sort of simple. And then from there, I'm going to generate what's called an access line. So it's a point that it's going to rotate around. Now remember, by doing this in a floor plan, what I've done is I've effectively drawn a shape on a floor plan, and I'm asking it now to revolve around that shape. So if I go ahead and hit Finish and switch to a 3D view, I should notice that it developed sort of a wheel shape, right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and move our wheel shape over to the side here. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a front elevation view. And again, from my front elevation view, I'm going to select the Revolve tool. And I'll go ahead and draw another shape, this time doing it again in the elevation view. Now this time when I use my access line, I'm telling it to rotate around my elevation view. So when I hit Finish, I should get a shape that obviously contradicts the orientation of our wheel. So notice when we use revolves, it's very important that we understand which view we're working in. It's really important in any one of the views that we develop, but especially important when we talk about operating in our revolves. I'm going to again switch back to my reference level. I'm going to switch to my Home tab and I'm going to select the Sweep tool. Now with the Sweep tool, I really have two parts to this. I first need to sketch a path. So I need to go ahead and sketch a path for my shape to move along. Once I've sketched the path, I then need to develop a profile for that path. So over here on the right, I could go ahead and either select a profile that's been loaded, I could load a profile, or I could, as an example, edit a profile. And in this case, you'll notice that I have by sketch selected. So if I hit Edit Profile, and I switch to a 3D view, you'll notice that I see the crosshairs in relationship to the path that I've drawn. So as an example, if I were to go ahead and just draw a simple circle and say Finish, and finish one more time, I would notice that that path is then followed. Perfect. Worked out very well for us. I'm going to again switch to my reference plane. I'm going to say that I want to create a swept blend. Just like when we did a sweep, we need to first sketch a path. I'm going to, in this case, draw a big arc and then say Finish. You'll notice that I have two profile options. So if I go ahead and say Select Profile 1 and I say Edit Profile, then in my 3D view, draw a circle at one end and then say Finish. I'll do Select Profile 2, Edit Profile. I'll draw another circle, but I'll draw a much larger one this time. When I say Finish and Finish again, you'll notice that that shape blends itself along my swept path. One thing to keep in mind, swept paths have a little bit of difficulty when you get into a complex path as well as a complex shape. So you don't want to get overly complicated in the development of your various shapes, but you can get away with quite a bit, much more than you could in a program like SketchUp or, for that matter, even some of the other 3D modeling programs that are out there. Does anyone have any questions about simple massing? Something you'd want to see again, something that didn't look quite right? All right, great. I am going to go ahead and switch back to my reference plane, and I'm going to delete these little masses that we developed here. I'm just going to get rid of them. And I'm going to zoom back into our reference plane. A quick reminder as we get into family creation, one of the things that a lot of people do incorrectly is when we develop a family, when we go ahead and develop a family that we're going to be working with, it's important that we, before developing any 3D masked content, we first develop our reference planes. Our reference planes are what are going to guide us in the development of content. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build a table. I'm going to go ahead and start by building a table. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the generic family that we worked in. I'm going to go up to my R symbol in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to create a new family. And I am going to scroll down to where it says furniture. I'll then say open. And I now have something that looks very similar to the previous display that we had. One thing that I like to point out, though, is that just because they look similar doesn't mean they are similar. There is something that is somewhat different about this. One thing is that when we look at the family category is set to furniture. So this is very important for obviously when we work and loading our content into our project. Now, in order to begin developing this family, I need to first develop some reference planes, as I talked about earlier. If I look at the Home tab of the ribbon, I can find a tool actually called Reference Plane. And if I select that tool, I can go ahead and say Pick Lines and begin developing a couple of reference planes. I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple of reference planes on screen here. To make it easier for yourself, one of the things that I like to do is I like to just change the length of some of my reference planes so I can sort of decipher between center lines and non-center lines. It makes it a little bit easier just to sort of get a feel for what's what. Now, very quickly, I've gone ahead and I've developed some generic reference planes that I can work for. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually building my tabletop. That's really the first point or first part of this family is building my tabletop. I'm going to switch to the Annotate tab of the ribbon, and I'm going to select my Align Dimension tool. Now, once I have my Align Dimension tool selected, I'm going to go ahead and select my first, my middle, and my last reference plane on this face. I'm going to do the same on the opposing side. Now from there what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a parameter. I'm going to add a parameter to these reference planes. I'm going to go ahead and select my dimensions that I have placed in here, and I'm going to apply what's called an equality parameter. And I'm going to do this on both sides. Now the reason it's important, what's important about doing that is obviously if I move one of these reference planes, you'll notice that it's moving the corresponding reference plane as well. Now this will be very important for us in just a few moments. Now at this point I haven't developed an adjustable parameter. I haven't developed a parameter that I can make modifications to within the type properties of this family. Now when I talk about type properties, that's really an important part of the discussion of family creation. There are two sets of parameters when we build content. There's what we call type properties. There's what we call instance properties. Now our type properties are properties that are specific to this particular type of table. So as an example, we might have a table that is a 30-inch, a 40-inch, a 50-inch. These might be varying table types. However, all of these tables might have the opportunity to have different finishes. So the finish might be an instance parameter in that setting. Now we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. It's a little bit easier to understand when we actually really get into the nitty-gritty of how we develop parameters. What I'm going to do is again go to the Annotate tab, and I'm going to select my Align Dimension tool. I'm going to pick my two outside reference planes. And I'll do this on the opposing side as well. Once I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and select my new dimension. And you'll notice when I do this that in my options bar, I get some new information. One of the things you'll notice that it says label, and right now it says none. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to add a parameter. And I have a couple different parameter types that I can do here. I could first develop what's called a family parameter. This is a parameter that cannot appear in a schedule or a tag once it's placed into our actual project. There's a couple of reasons for that. We'll talk about some of those later on, more so next week when we get into adjusting families. But we also have the ability to create shared parameters. Now these are parameters that can be shared with other projects or other families. So as an example, if it was a parameter that we might want to tag a piece of furniture by, we would want to use the shared parameter tool because that's a parameter that could then be imported into a family tag or into an annotated tag. We're going to go ahead and start by creating a family parameter, and the name for this parameter is going to be the width. Notice that the type parameter is already filled out for me. It says length, and the group parameter is already set to be dimension. There's lots of different group parameters that I could specify this by. The group parameter is really the designation of how this parameter is going to be grouped in our type properties. For now, dimensions is fine. Again, I'm going to list this as a type parameter, and I'm going to say OK. Now, in doing so, you'll notice that the width parameter now presents itself in this annotation. I'm going to do the same thing on the lower hand side here. I'm going to, again, select my dimension. I'm going to say that I want to add a parameter. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to add a length parameter and say OK. The first rule in family creation is that we always want to test what we've done. We always want to test the adaptations and the adjustments that we're making. So as an example, what I'm going to do is on the Home tab of the ribbon, I'm going to select my Family and Types tool. And when I do this, I'm going to get a little prompt to that shows my width and length parameter that I generated. Now, if I were to go in here and adjust, for instance, the width from 4 feet to 6 feet and hit apply, I'd want to be assured that down or over in my view window that adjustment was also made. I want to do the same thing with my length, so I'll go ahead and say 6 feet again, and I'll say apply. Notice that it made the adjustment, no error messages prompted, everything looks great. I don't care how excellent of a family creator you are or how experienced you get, it's always important that we're always checking to make sure that these sorts of things are happening. It's way easier to catch an error in the early development of a family than it is later on once the family's already been generated. So this regular checking is a very good practice. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to an elevation view. So I'm going to switch to my front elevation. You'll notice that right now I have a reference plane, a reference level shown here. I've got a couple of reference planes that I see on screen. These reference planes are actually planes developed from our reference level, our floor plan level. I'm going to go ahead and create another reference plane. And I'm going to say that this reference plane occurs 30 inches off of our reference level. I'm going to again go to my Annotate tab. I'm going to select my Align Dimension tool. I'm going to pick my top and then my reference level. I'm going to apply another parameter to this one, and I'm going to say that this parameter is height. And again, just to make sure that that works properly, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Type Properties window, and I'll change the height to 3 feet, hit Apply. You'll notice that it changed, no problem. So very quickly, you can see we've developed a pretty generic layout. Now I'm going to just sort of drive things a little bit, make things just a hair more complicated. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to develop some reference planes for the legs of this table. So I'm going to develop some reference planes for the legs of the table. I'm going to start by going to the Home tab, grabbing my reference plane tool, grabbing my reference plane, and I'm going to create some reference planes that sit 2 inches inside of the edge of my table. And if you remember what I talked about just a few moments ago, very good to toggle some of these dimension or some of these reference planes, just for the sake of obviously deciphering between which reference plane is which. Unfortunately, we can't color code them yet, but for the time being, we have to kind of use these little tricks just to have a better understanding of how this stuff's going to work. I'm going to develop one more type of parameter real quick. I'm going to create a locking constraint. So what I'm going to do is, again, go to my Annotate tab. I'm going to grab my Dimension tool. And I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick dimension from the outside edge of my table to what's going to be the inside leg of the chair. And I'm going to lock that parameter. Again, I'll do this on the other side as well. Now the reason for doing this is so that the edge or the overhang of that table is consistent. It's always going to have a 2-inch overhang, regardless of what the table changes in size. So just to recap, we've created 3 different types of parameters. We've created adjustable parameters. We've created equal parameters, equalizing parameters, and we've created locking parameters. So all 3 of these are different types of parameters that we can work with. Now I'm going to go ahead and just check to make sure that that 2-inch is consistent. I'm going to, again, open up my Family and Types window. I'm going to change my width to 6 feet, my length to 6 feet, and my height I'll change to 2.6, and I'll say Apply. No error messages prompt. Everything looks great. Notice the 2 inches was maintained. Everything moved properly. Perfect. Exactly what we want. Again, I can't stress enough the need to just continually check to make sure all of this information is continually updating properly. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the legs. So I'm going to create the reference planes for our legs in this. I'm going to, again, go ahead and create another reference plane. I'll go ahead and say 2 inches once more. Another thing to keep in mind is that everything starts to get a little dizzy at this point. There's so much information on screen that sometimes it can become almost a bit overwhelming in looking at some of the information. It gets easier the more you work on the families. It gets a little bit, you start to sort of see things a bit better, but it takes a little bit of getting used to just to see all this content kind of start to pile up. So if you got something that looks a little crazy at the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a parameter, an adjustable parameter for the legs. So what I'm going to do is from my Annotate tab, I'm going to grab my Dimension tool. I'm going to pick the reference plane that's attached to the locking parameter. And I'm going to just go ahead and place a couple of these dimensions around the project. Now the reason for doing this, again, is so that this parameter for our leg is adjustable. And I'm going to go ahead and select one of the parameters. I'm going to say that I want to create an add parameter. And I am going to put leg. We'll just say TL, so it doesn't pile up on us too much here. So we can see that the table leg is 2 inches right now. Now what's great is I don't have to do that same process over and over again. I don't have to select the parameter, go in, add a parameter. What I can do, because these parameters are all the same, is I can just simply select them, go to the label, and apply a label. So another nifty trick is the ability to apply a label to a said parameter. Now again, we've added quite a bit of data here, so I just want to make sure everything's working properly. What I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and open up my Family and Types window. I am going to change everything. So I'm going to change the width of my table. I'm going to change the length of my table. I'm going to change the table leg. I'll say the table leg is 4 inches. And I'll change the height too. And I'll say apply. Again, I didn't get any error messages. Everything seems to be updating properly. But again, I just want to keep making sure that I'm checking on the off chance that I maybe missed something. You know, maybe something didn't work quite the way I wanted it to. Now that we've got a good chunk of data built, now that we've got kind of everything sort of working the way we want it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just build some more, build some content. You know, we've built a lot of parameters at this point. Probably not a bad idea to just go ahead and start building some entities. One of the things that I'm noticing, though, right off the top of my head is that the first thing I want to build is the tabletop. That's really the first thing I want to build. But if I look at a front view, one of the things that I don't have right now is a tabletop thickness. So what I probably want to do is add one more reference plane that I can lock for that table thickness. So what I'm going to do is I'll apply 2 inches here. I'll just offset that top. I'll again go to my Annotate tab, select my Align tool, and I'll just go ahead and dimension what's going to be my tabletop thickness. Now you'll notice that I'm using some abbreviations here. One of the reasons I'm doing this is just because I want to keep this sort of abbreviation you see at the end of the dimension sort of small. Tabletop thickness gets a little long, so I use a lot of abbreviations just to make it a little bit easier for me to see things on screen. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my reference plane. And I'm going to go ahead and draw my tabletop. I'm going to go to my Home tab. I'm going to select my Extrusion tool. I'm going to grab my Rectangle tool. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a rectangle along that outside reference plane that I developed. One of the things you'll notice when I do that is I get these locking constraints. And what these do is they lock the face or the edge of that to the actual reference plane. Now, why is that important? Well, what's important about it is when we go in to our type properties, we want to be able to make adjustments to the length and width of our table, and obviously have the shape change also. So you'll notice by making these changes over here, the shape changed also. So not having to do things like, for instance, adjust thicknesses by using these push-pulls. The parameters are actually controlling the size of the shape. If I switch to a front elevation, you'll notice that my shape is sitting not quite within the tabletop height and thickness that I have drawn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, from my Modify tab, select my Align tool. I'm going to pick my top reference plane and the top of my shape, and then lock those two items together. I'll also lock the bottom of that table to the thickness of the tabletop. I'll switch to my 3D view, and I'll just go ahead and make a couple quick changes. Again, I'm going to change the width of this. I'll change the table thickness. I'll go ahead and change the table length, and I'll say apply. You'll notice the thickness changed, everything grew, and again, no error messages on screen. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build the legs for this table. This will be a bit more complicated. I'm going to go to the Home tab. I'm going to grab my Extrusion tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, one by one, draw in that leg. Now I want to make sure that I lock that leg in 4 spots every time. Now the reason I say every time is because you'll notice that things start to get a little cluttered, right? I'm seeing lots of padlocks all of a sudden, some locked, some not. I want to always make sure that I'm locking 4 padlocks every time I do this, because that's locking all the sides. You'll notice that even sometimes the locks end up on top of each other. So again, making sure we're counting this off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do it one more time right over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll go ahead and say finish, and I'll switch to my front elevation. You'll notice that the height isn't quite where it needs to be. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll align the tabletop thickness to the legs and lock. Now if I go ahead and switch to my 3D view, you'll notice that I've developed a pretty simple table, nothing major. And you'll notice that if I go to my type properties and I change things like, for instance, I'll change the width to 8 feet. I'll change the tabletop thickness to 2 inches. I'll change the length to 3'6", and I'll change the height to 3 feet, and I'll say apply. Very quickly I'm able to obviously modify the size and shape of my table. Let's go ahead and change those legs also. Change the legs to 2 inches and hit apply. Notice the legs are also adjusting. So everything's parametric. Everything's kind of talking back and forth. We're getting really great information from this family. Now, let's talk about some other opportunities we have in generating a family. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just change the width and length back to 4 feet and say apply. Say OK. I'll switch back to my reference level. We're going to go ahead and just make this a bit more interesting, make this family just a little bit more exciting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a hole on the top of this table. Now we have a couple of ways that we could do this. We could first select our tabletop, select Edit Extrusion, and if we wanted to, we could create a hole using our square tool within this tabletop. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a void form. And what a void form does is it actually subtracts information from another form. So you'll notice on the Home tab, if I go to void form, all of my form styles are available. The difference being is these actually void as opposed to add. So what I'm going to do is select the void form or void extrusion tool. I'm going to go ahead and use my rectangle tool. I'm going to draw a square. And I'm going to lock that in a few locations. I'll then say finish, and I'll switch to a 3D view. Now you'll notice that I've got this void form, and it's kind of sitting on the floor right now. So if I switch to a front elevation, I'm probably going to want to align that void with the associated elements. Now if I go ahead and switch to 3D, you'll notice that at the moment, all it's done is created this little orange block. What I need to do is on the Modify tab, select my Cut tool. I then could go ahead and select my face of my form, and then select the void. And you'll notice it now subtracts out that piece of information. Now what I could do if I wanted, I'm going to switch back to a reference plane, is I'm going to go to the Home tab, and I'm going to go ahead and draw another extrusion. I'm going to draw the extrusion in the same place that I drew the void. And I'll say finish. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this piece of void into a piece of glass, so I have sort of a glass inlay inside of my table. What I can do is I can go ahead and first draw another reference plane, and I'm going to say this reference plane is about a 1/2 inch down. And I'm going to create a locking parameter so that our glass maintains that 1/2 inch thickness. So if I switch to a 3D, you'll notice that that hole has kind of been plugged with an object. Now if I switch to a shaded display, you'll notice that currently all of the entities that we see in the project are all this gray color. They're just blank gray. Now I could go ahead and change that. I could actually add some material properties to this content. Now material properties are fairly important because they allow us to adjust various entities in our model by manipulating the materials we see on screen. What I can do is select an object, and when I select an object, I'll notice in my properties palette, I have an option over here called materials and finishes. And right now you'll see the material says by category. Now if I go ahead and hit this little box just to the right of where it says by category, you'll notice I'm able to associate a parameter to that. So if I were to go ahead and hit add a parameter, I could say table legs. I'll group that parameter under material finish, and I'll say OK, and I'll say OK. I'll do the same to the ring around the top here with my rail system. I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'll go ahead and say by category. I'll add a parameter, and I will say table top. OK, OK. And I'll select our piece of glass. I'll add a parameter to that. Add a parameter, and I'll say table glass. Say OK. Now just by putting those words in there, I didn't necessarily change the representation of my table on screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my Family and Types window, and you'll notice that I now have an option in here to make some adjustments to the values. So as an example where it says table top, right now the value says by category. I'm going to go ahead and select on that little button with 3 prongs on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a material real quick. I'm going to say table legs. Actually, I'll just say table wood. We'll say 1. And for my appearance, or for my material, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down to wood. I'm just going to select, I think there's a good walnut in here actually. Let's just, we'll grab that walnut real quick. Actually, we'll do a teak with a natural polish. So I've got the teak applied for the table legs, and I'll say OK. Or for the tabletop, I'm sorry. For the table legs, we'll go ahead and we'll apply table wood 1 as well. In this instance, maybe we want those to be the same thing. Say OK. And for the table glass, I'm going to go ahead and apply glass. Say OK. OK. And you'll notice very quickly I'm able to obviously have these differing materials display on screen for me. Now we haven't talked about everything as it relates to family creation. Still a few more components I want to talk to you about. But we'll just do a couple quick things here just to dress the family up a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a sweep that goes around this family. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Home tab. And from the Home tab, I am going to grab my sweep tool. And one of the options I have is to pick a path. Now, picking a path is a really great tool because what it does is it actually constrains the path to the object we pick. So as an example, I'm just picking the table edge that I have shown. I'm going to go ahead and say Finish. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply just a nice edge to the end of this table. I'm going to go ahead and say Edit Profile. And I'm going to go ahead and draw just a little shape here. We'll say it comes out, an inch. And we'll say it comes down, we'll say it comes down a distance of something nominal. So nothing crazy here. Just went ahead and drew just sort of a generic shape. I'm going to do something a little strange here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a dimension real quick to this shape. So you'll notice it says right now that that's 3 1/4. I'm going to say that this parameter is, we'll say this is the edge. We'll say table edge. We'll say OK. I'm going to go ahead and say finish, finish. So I get this sort of a nice shape that goes around. I'm going to apply a material to that also. We'll say add a parameter, table edge. Oh, we'll say table edge metal. Okay. And I'll go into my shared parameters here real quick. I'll just add a quick material on here. We'll go with a kind of a cool bronze, like a polished bronze, and we'll say OK and OK. So I've got some information on screen here. What I'm going to talk to you about briefly here is formulas and how we can create a formula. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my Family and Types window. And in my Family and Types window, I am going to take a look at my table edge. Now, right now, my table edge is 3 1/4 of an inch. Let's say that I wanted my table edge to relate to my table thickness. So we notice that table thickness is TT. It's located right here. Now, right now, the table thickness is 2 inches. Let's say I wanted the table edge to be the table thickness plus, we'll say 1 inch. Now you'll notice when I do that the table edge now switches to 3 inches. So as an example, if I were to change the table top to 4 inches and hit apply, my table edge would switch to 5 inches. So these items are now related to one another. They're directly related to one another. Now this is a pretty uncomplicated formula. If you actually take our family creation course, we get into very, very detailed formulas where we talk about if-then statements. We talk about how we develop parametric formulas that work with things such as shelving units or systems where we might have information that's set up by an array parameter, which is a very difficult thing to do. We also work with things such as yes-no parameters that touch on visibility. So a lot of different items that we get into in our family creation course, and you're welcome to contact Dave Press in regards to that if it's something you might be interested in. Also, as you can see in this simple demonstration, we developed a pretty uncomplicated table, but I'm sure you can imagine when we talk about something much more complicated than something like a table, we get far more technical in the way that we set up those parameters. So a service that we offer here at Sterling is actually generating content for your office, which includes things such as fully parametric doors that have automated swings or adjustable swings. We also get into things such as nested families, which can sometimes make it a bit easier for your firm to work in a more seamless work setting. We're not going to get into any of that today in this introduction to family creation. We're sort of keeping things a little bit more general. However, I'm hoping that you're able to take something away from this presentation. Now what I'm going to do is, for some reason I'm guessing I just didn't say use reference here. We're just going to go ahead and just change a couple more quick things in working with this family. I'm not crazy necessarily about the table leg thickness, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to up the thickness of these table legs. We'll say to 4 inches, and I'll say OK. Just gets it a little bit meatier. It looks like a nicer table at this point. One thing that I also I'm interested in doing would be putting some chairs around this, getting some chairs around this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and place some chairs. I'm going to go ahead first, though, and switch to a reference level. One of the things that's very important in building a family is creating different types. So I'm going to go up to my family and type window, and I'm going to go ahead and just generate a couple of types. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a new family type. I'm going to say that this is a, we'll say square dining. And I'm going to leave this as the 4x4, and I'm going to change the height in this instance to 2 feet 6 inches. I'm going to create another new type, and I'm going to call this one a rec dining. And the thing I'm going to change about this is the table's length. I'm going to go ahead and change the table length in this instance to 6 foot 6 inches. And I'll change the width to 3 foot 6 inches. Height will stay at 2.6. I'm also going to go ahead and say bar dining. And in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the width to 5 feet, the height to 3 foot 6, and the length to 5 feet. And I'll say OK. Now what's important about what I just did is actually if I switch through different types, if I actually switch through the different types that I built on screen, you'll notice that that table changes based on the type that I have selected. So these various types now modify the display on screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to a reference level, and I'm going to place some chairs in real quick. I'm going to go to the Home tab, and on the Home tab, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, I'm going to load a family. And I am going to go to Furniture, and I am going to load, let's see if we've got a simple chair here that we can put in, something that's kind of cool. I'm not seeing anything that's all that cool here. We'll just use these, this little stacking chair as an example, and we'll say Open. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and place that stacking chair on screen here. And if I switch to a 3D view, I should notice that I have a chair. If I go ahead and select that chair, if I had to guess, there's probably some parameters in here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and apply the right wood. So notice now we have the wood is now matching on this chair for us. Now I'm going to add a visibility parameter to this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click all of these chairs that I have on screen. I'm going to click all of them here. And I'm going to add a label to them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one the square dining table, or square dining. And I'll say OK. Next, what I'm going to do is on my reference level, I am going to go ahead and switch my type to my rectangular. And I am going to temporarily hide those chairs that I've already placed. And I'm going to again put in some more chairs. And what I'll do is I'll select those chairs and I'll apply a parameter to them. I will go ahead and say rec table. Say OK. I'm going to go ahead and temporarily hide those as well. Whoops. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to switch my type to the bar style. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab, and I'm going to type in stool. See if Autodesk Seek's got a nice stool that we can use. Perfect. Use this guy right here. So I want to make sure this is working right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the stool that I just got off Autodesk Seek right into our project here. Not quite sure how this stool looks, so what I'll do is we'll look at it in 3D. Looks like we got it the right way. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this stool in a couple places. Bear with me for just a second here. See if this works. Perfect. Move these out just a bit. And again, I'll just apply a quick visibility parameter to these stools. Now there is a very good reason for why I did all of this. And it's because what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle it so that depending on which option or which type of table we have, the stools are represented properly. So as an example, if I go into my type properties and I look at bar dining, you'll notice that right now the options are set up for each one of these particular tables. Now what I need to do is I want to make sure that they're displaying or not displaying based on how I want them to read on screen. What I want to do though, you know what, sorry, I did set up a parameter on each one of these. What I wanted to do though is just set up a quick visibility on this. Just give me 1 second here and I'll have this all set up right. Kind of looks like a cluster on screen here. My apologies. Give me 1 second and I'll get this all the way we want it. All right. So when we look at our type properties, what we want to see now is the option to turn that particular chair on or off. One of the other things that's nice about adding parameters to those items is that if that family had multiple types, which in this case it actually doesn't, we could go ahead and make those adjustments. Now, what we want right now, though, I've got I have this set up kind of the way I need it to. I just want to turn off the parameters so I don't see certain things on screen. I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of these other parameters that aren't really important to what we're doing. But what I am going to do is I'm going to say that in our bar setting, I don't want to see the rec chairs, and I don't want to see the square or the square table chairs. And in the rec version, I don't want to see the square version, and I don't want to see the bar chairs. And in my square version, I don't want to see the rec chairs, and I don't want to see the bar chairs. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now, it looks like I've got a whole bunch of data on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this family, and I'm going to save this just to my desktop here, and we'll call this our Sterling table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start a new project. I'm going to now load that table that we just developed into our project. And I'm just going to plop it right on screen. I'll switch to a 3D view. So you'll notice that I've got my table on screen here. I'm going to just copy that over a few feet. I'm going to select the table, and I'm going to change it from my square to my rec. I'll make a copy of that real quick, and I'll just pull that over just a few. And I'll change that from my rec to my bar. So you'll notice very quickly, just with a few different parameters that we've used in this project, we're able to create 3 different types of a table that is fully parametric. If we wanted to at some point go ahead and make an adjustment, let's say we weren't happy with the leg width, we could always edit the type of this family, and you'll notice that those parameters are right there for us to go ahead and make adjustments. That is a crash course on family creation. It's our introductory to family creation. Again, if this didn't get everything you wanted, it doesn't mean we don't offer it. We definitely have a lot of topics that still would be covered in our family creation class, which include things such as nesting, array parameters, detailed and complex formulas, as well as working with parameters that are a bit more complicated from the typical generic ones that I worked with today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and start loading up the question board. Just want to go back real quick and show you a quick slide here. Again, we have an upcoming event February 16th with Lynn Allen, as I spoke about earlier. Really great opportunity to meet one of the experts in all things Autodesk. If it's something that's taught, she knows it. Really well experienced, well respected, and definitely it'd be a pleasure to have her right here in the Scottsdale area. If you have any questions regarding the event or would like to sign up, we will be sending out mail-outs that I'm sure some of you may have already got. But please don't hesitate to contact Dave Press, who's the Vice President of Sales and also an account manager here with Sterling Systems. You'll notice right there is all of Dave's contact information. You can also reach us here in our office at 1-480-629-8131. My name is Brandon LaCourciere. I'm a senior consultant here with Sterling Systems. Right there is my extraordinarily long email address, so please feel free to write that down. A couple things I want to point out. On Monday, January 16th, we're going to be having the part 3 of this mini lecture, which is editing family creation. So we're going to look at families similar to that table, and we're going to talk about how we can dissect them. I think we're going to talk about a door and see if we can't work with a piece of mechanical equipment if we have some time left over after that door family. Wednesday, January 25th, we're going to be talking about top 10 tips and tricks. We're going to be covering everything from phasing to design options and work sets, things that have always been of an interest but maybe you weren't always able to cover. It's been an absolute pleasure having you guys on here this evening. If you don't have any questions, you're welcome to take off. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and post them. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us. I hope that I can spend some time with each of you at some point moving forward. Thank you very much.